One grows weary of writing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, not because the subject lacks importance, but because one might as well be writing about the tides. The same arguments resurface with each wave of violence, the same justifications are deployed, the same atrocities are committed with the same explanations, and the same international community issues the same meaningless statements of concern. If insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly while expecting different results, then the Holy Land is the world's largest psychiatric ward. But here we are in 2025, and I'm told the situation requires comment, as if my comment or anyone else's will make the slightest difference to people who have been murdering each other over the same strip of land since before I was born, and will continue doing so long after I'm gone. Still, one must try to speak clearly about unclear things, especially when the unclear things involve the killing of children, which both sides manage to do with appalling regularity, while maintaining their respective claims to moral superiority. Let me begin with what should be obvious but apparently isn't. Both peoples have legitimate claims to the land, and both peoples have behaved abominably in pressing those claims. The Palestinians were indeed displaced from their homes in 1948, and this displacement was indeed a catastrophe for them, whatever one thinks of the circumstances that led to it. The Jews indeed faced centuries of persecution culminating in genocide, and their desire for a homeland where they could defend themselves is entirely understandable. Anyone who denies either of these facts is not serious about resolving anything. The tragedy is that these two entirely legitimate narratives of suffering have become weapons used to justify further suffering. The Holocaust is invoked to excuse the occupation, as if the gas chambers of Europe gave Israel permanent immunity from moral criticism. The Nakba is invoked to justify terrorism, as if the displacement of Palestinians gave their descendants the right to blow up buses full of civilians. Both sides have become so invested in their own victimhood that they've lost the ability to recognize the humanity of the other. And now, in 2025, we have the latest round of violence, which looks remarkably like all the previous rounds except with better technology. Hamas or its successor organizations fire rockets that are increasingly sophisticated but still largely ineffective. Israel responds with airstrikes that are devastatingly effective but politically counterproductive. Civilians die on both sides, though in vastly disproportionate numbers. The international community condemns everyone and no one, and eventually a ceasefire is declared that holds until the next time it doesn't. The American position remains what it has always been: official support for a two-state solution that everyone knows isn't going to happen, combined with unlimited military aid to Israel and occasional finger-wagging about settlements that continue to expand regardless. The Europeans issue statements about international law that no one takes seriously. The Arab states make noises about Palestinian rights while secretly cooperating with Israel on security matters. The whole thing is a diplomatic kabuki theater where everyone knows their lines and no one expects the play to end. What's particularly galling is the religious dimension that poisons everything it touches. Jewish fundamentalists claim God gave them the land. Muslim fundamentalists claim God gave it to them. And Christian fundamentalists support Israel because they think it will hasten the apocalypse wherein, incidentally, all the Jews will be converted or destroyed. One might think that adults in the 21st century could find better reasons for territorial disputes than the alleged real estate preferences of their respective invisible friends, but apparently not. The settlers, those religious zealots who believe God is a real estate agent who promised them the West Bank, continue their project of making a Palestinian state impossible by creating facts on the ground. They build their hilltop outposts and dare the world to stop them, knowing that the Israeli government will eventually legalize what was illegal and protect what was supposedly unauthorized. They are the most honest actors in this drama in their way. They want all the land and they're taking it, and they don't pretend otherwise. Meanwhile, the Palestinian leadership remains what it has been for decades: corrupt, incompetent, and more interested in maintaining their own power than in improving the lives of their people. The Palestinian Authority governs like a mafia with NGO funding. Hamas governs like a death cult with Iranian backing, and ordinary Palestinians are trapped between them, their Israeli occupiers, and their Arab brothers, who use their cause for rhetorical purposes while treating actual Palestinian refugees like unwanted guests. The peace process, that phrase that should be retired for exhaustion, continues to be invoked by people who know perfectly well that there is no process and there will be no peace. The two-state solution is dead, killed by settlements, demographic changes, and political realities that no one wants to acknowledge. The one-state solution is impossible because it would mean either the end of Israel as a Jewish state or the permanent disenfranchisement of Palestinians, neither of which is acceptable or sustainable. So we're left with the current reality, a de facto one-state arrangement where Palestinians live under Israeli control but without Israeli rights, a situation that looks increasingly like apartheid. Yes, I'll use the word that sends Israel's defenders into paroxysms of rage. If you control a territory and its people for more than half a century, if you subject them to different laws than your own citizens, if you restrict their movement and control their resources, what else should we call it? The fact that Israel has legitimate security concerns doesn't change the fundamental nature of the arrangement. But here's what the anti-Israel crowd doesn't want to hear. None of this absolves Palestinian organizations of their own crimes. Terrorism remains terrorism even when practiced by the oppressed. Targeting civilians remains a war crime even when you're the weaker party. The fact that Israel has more power doesn't make Hamas or Islamic Jihad or any of the other death cults into freedom fighters. They're theocratic fascists who would create a Taliban-style state if given the chance, and no amount of legitimate grievance changes that fact. The BDS movement, meanwhile, continues to pretend that boycotting Israeli academics and artists will somehow bring about peace, as if the problem were insufficient economic pressure rather than fundamental disagreements about existence itself. They adopt the tactics of the anti-apartheid movement without understanding that South Africa's white minority needed the black majority in a way that Israel doesn't need the Palestinians. The boycotts make Western activists feel good about themselves but do nothing for actual Palestinians except to convince Israelis that the world is against them, which hardly encourages concessions. And through it all, the body count rises. Palestinian children killed by Israeli missiles aimed at Hamas leaders who may or may not have been there. Israeli children traumatized by rockets and sirens, even if the Iron Dome intercepts most of the projectiles. Young Israeli soldiers enforcing an occupation that corrupts them even as it oppresses Palestinians. Young Palestinians who see no future except resistance that usually means their own deaths. The whole thing is a machine for producing human misery, and everyone involved knows it, but no one knows how to stop it. The truth that no one wants to acknowledge is that this conflict will not end until both sides give up things they consider essential to their identity. Israel will have to give up the dream of Greater Israel and accept that security doesn't come from controlling territory but from making peace with neighbors. Palestinians will have to give up the dream of return and accept that the refugees aren't going back to homes that no longer exist in villages that have become Tel Aviv suburbs. Both will have to give up the notion that they can win this conflict rather than merely survive it. But this won't happen because both sides are led by people who benefit from the conflict's continuation. Israeli politicians win elections by promising security through strength. Palestinian leaders maintain power by promising resistance until victory. The conflict has become an industry that employs thousands: soldiers, bureaucrats, aid workers, journalists, activists, propagandists. Peace would put them all out of work. So we continue with this grotesque dance, this call and response of violence and retaliation, this competitive victimhood where everyone's grandfather's suffering justifies today's cruelty. The Israeli right becomes more fascistic, the Palestinian resistance more nihilistic, the international community more useless, and the prospects for peace more distant. Anyone who points out the obvious, that this is insane, that it solves nothing, that it only perpetuates suffering, is dismissed as naive or treacherous or anti-Semitic or Islamophobic or whatever label serves to shut down thought. I've been called all of these things, usually by people who think criticism of Israel is automatically anti-Semitic, or that acknowledging Palestinian suffering makes one a terrorist sympathizer. This binary thinking, this with us or against us mentality, this inability to hold two thoughts simultaneously, that Israel has the right to exist and Palestinians have the right to freedom, that terrorism is wrong and occupation is wrong, that Hamas is fascistic and Israeli policy is oppressive. This is what makes the conflict so intractable. What would I propose? Since no one asked but everyone expects a solution, complete withdrawal from the occupied territories, massive international investment in Palestinian development, a truth and reconciliation process, shared sovereignty over Jerusalem, compensation for refugees, security guarantees for Israel, and a gradual normalization of relations. Will any of this happen? Of course not. It requires leaders on both sides who care more about their people's future than their own power, and such leaders are notably absent. Instead, we'll have more of the same. More settlements, more rockets, more airstrikes, more children dead, more hatred cultivated for the next generation, more conferences that achieve nothing, more statements of concern, more weapons sales, more humanitarian aid that doesn't address the fundamental problem, more of everything except peace. The saddest part is that Israelis and Palestinians are more alike than different. They're both traumatized peoples who've convinced themselves that their trauma justifies anything. They both claim to want peace while taking actions that make peace impossible. They both believe their cause is just, and their methods are justified. They're like two drowning people pulling each other under, each convinced that their survival depends on the other's destruction. Years ago, I met a Palestinian doctor and an Israeli teacher who had both lost children to this conflict. They had become friends, united in their grief and their determination that other parents not suffer as they had. They were working together for peace, against the wishes of many in their respective communities who saw such cooperation as betrayal. They knew their efforts were probably futile, but they continued anyway because, as the doctor said, "What else can we do? Hate forever?" That's the question, isn't it? What else can we do? The answer apparently is yes, hate forever, kill forever, suffer forever, in the name of causes that have become more important than the people they're supposedly serving. The land has become more sacred than the lives lost fighting over it. The past has become more important than the future. The dead have become more important than the living. And so it continues, this war that's not quite a war, this peace that's not quite a peace, this endless, grinding, soul-destroying conflict that makes everyone involved worse than they might otherwise be. In 2025, as in 1925 or 2005 or probably 2055, the Holy Land remains the place where hope goes to die, where God's supposed favorites act in ways that would shame the devil, where the promise of redemption has become a guarantee of damnation. The international community will continue to pretend that a solution is just around the corner, if only everyone would be reasonable. But reason left this building long ago, replaced by rage and righteousness, and the kind of certainty that allows people to kill children while maintaining their sense of virtue. Until that changes, until both sides decide they'd rather live in peace than die for justice, the killing will continue, and those of us watching from the outside will continue our useless commentary, like a Greek chorus in a tragedy that never ends.